Hello, hello. The Birthday Boys is a 1991 historical novel by Beryl Bainbridge, which tells of the doomed polar Antarctic expedition by Robert Falcon Scott, the Terra Nova expedition, and its doomed struggle to be the first men to reach the South Pole in 1912. The expedition continues after that, but spoiler alert, Scott does not. But this is a novel that, in my defense, is a novel that assumes that you have at least a passing acquaintance with the events of this novel, of the events depicted in this novel. Beryl Bainbridge was born 1932, died 2010, an English writer known for chiefly, I guess, psychological fiction, though obviously historical novels as well. She's won the Whitbread Prize for Best Novel twice, is nominated for the Booker Prize 5 times. The Birthday Boys is divided into 5 sections, each from the point of view of a separate member of the final push to the pole, and is told in sort of each section kind of tells a different section of that expedition, starting off with Petty Officer Taft Wilson, sort of the most kind of lower class, hard drinking dude of the thing, who kind of the pre-voyage kind of introduces the characters, shows you all the funding that they had to raise money to get the expedition, and this was kind of like a big public interest project. These were heroic Englishmen going off to do stuff for the Empire, which people are kind of, the English are rather kind of nervous about at this point, because the English Empire is shrinking and, will steadily dying off. The next section, we get Dr. Wilson. Well, I'm not going to go with all the whole names there. Is sort of the voyage. We get kind of setting up in the Antarctic from the section called The Owner, which is Captain Robert Falcon Scott. Then we get Brthdy Bys telling of one kind of a side expedition, which was very nearly fatal, which is a journey to Cape Crozier, which Brthdy, along with Dr. Wilson and Cherry Garrard, went off in search of kind of the Emperor penguin, wanting to visit a colony of that and get some of their eggs. And this is a section that definitely really hammers home exactly how deadly of an environment they're on. And finally, we get Captain Lawrence Edward Titus Oates on that final fatal try to the South Pole, where nobody survives. Again, spoiler alerts for these five people who are turned into characters very ably by Beryl Bainbridge. None of them survive, but they have their journal entries. They have letters and stuff that were discovered later when the bodies were discovered. So yes. This, as I said at the beginning, the Birthday Boys presumes that you know this story, and you probably got some passing ideas of sort of the debates about, like, why it failed. They were in the end they were beaten by a Norwegian team, by Amundsen, a Norwegian fellow, and his team, which they were going to do the North Pole, but got word that Perry had gotten there first, so they immediately just switched gears and headed to the South Pole. And indeed, due to basically the Norwegians grew up in snow and really knew, like, all the techniques, and were very much more kind of mountaineers, professional skiers, where Scott's expedition was using a lot of people who were scientists, because it was a scientific expedition as well as the glory of getting to the South Pole first. But all these people were, like, learning how to do stuff on as they got to the Antarctic, which is like, oh, I'm going to learn how to ski now that I'm in really horrific conditions, where you have all these Norwegians who, like, I grew up, I basically was born on skis, and I know all this stuff kind of innately, and and stuff like that, and stuff like, they were very skeptical, the English, about using dogs, about using they use ponies, and we have some horrific sections in here about how poor Siberian ponies should have never been brought into this thing, and did not work out. There is also sort of this manly thing of like, oh, we shouldn't be letting creatures do it. We're going to pull the sleds ourselves, which is it's definitely, it's a different ethos. It's definitely very much there's this masculine thing of manly, like it's not just doing it, but it's how you do it, and it's like, that kind of idea. So yeah, and for the kind of final clincher of why you probably should know the story beforehand is because if you get to the end of this novel, it cuts off with Oates, who has some very famous lines, which are probably the most famous kind of stiff upper lip British lines that you will ever hear. This is the pinnacle of that. I don't know if I should say them or not, but that cuts off, and Scott Wilson and Bauer's fate isn't actually shown in the novel because it's from the point of view of Oates, who dies before they do. Again, this is something you should probably just know going into a novel like this is, yes, they continued on, but ended up getting trapped by a blizzard 11 miles away from the next food depot and dying there 11 miles away. But trapped in vicious blizzard, and with horrible frostbite, gangrene. Even the people who survived this stuff, came away with medical stuff that stayed with them for the rest of their lives, because just unimaginably crazy conditions to be in. So because, but I don't think that's Beryl Bainbridge does an amazing job of compressing and putting and allusions to and putting all that into the thing, and then you can go away afterwards. I watched kind of some documentaries and stuff like that. I can see myself going on and reading about this stuff, but what she got to was probably actually the thing that would probably interest me the most, is like, why the hell are these guys doing this? Why would you put yourself through this? As I started off with, there's very much kind of this nationalism thing of, this is pre-World War I, and there's this kind of competition for the glory of the English Empire that we are going to do this. And indeed, at a time when people are feeling very anxious about the slipping of England's status in the world, that this was seen as a way of propping that up, of showing that we're still the best, we're the greatest. So there's that very much that kind of thing of empire. And, you think about the English Empire in its greatest glory. It's the great explorers, that's heroic age of exploration. And this was seen as sort of the last gasp of that. And indeed, even though why there's this novel, and I think there seems to be still such fascination with this time, is that even after Scott's death, he was created as this kind of national hero, national martyr, especially after all the horrible, brutal, meaningless deaths of World War I. He was seen as this kind of epitome of great British manhood, of someone who's thing. Now, since that time, there has been a lot of debate over whether he was the great hero, or if he was a bumbler whose overambition got himself and a whole bunch of other people killed. So it's kind of a rich area for people to argue in there, and that's why these are the things that just a small thing that you would think, oh, a couple of guys died trying to do something. It's like, no, this got taken up as sort of an emblem for Britain, for the empire and stuff like that. And so there's that. And I think, the individual men, there's very much this thing of kind of, ambition of, he is really driven. There's a lot of references to a fellow that he worked with in previous expedition, Shackleton, and their falling out and stuff like that. I actually kind of looked into that more outside of the novel, where Shackleton was on an earlier expedition with Scott. They had a falling out. They had a falling out because of what Shackleton did afterwards, or promises that were made, da 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 da, and seems there's a lot in here of Scott saying like, oh, I need to be ahead of Shackleton at this point. I need to be ahead of him at this point. It's like all these kind of outside ambitions where you should be really focusing in on the material stuff of right now. And maybe that's a part of the fatal flaws of why Scott's expedition got. But I mean, there's so many more, including the fact that they thought they had a good idea of kind of average temperatures and how they could outrun it. Unfortunately, they didn't figure for that every 15 years there's a super severe winter in Antarctica, and that most definitely caught and killed them. Aside from all the other stuff, and the fact that Amundsen was going to win anyways by getting to the South Pole first, just because of superior skills, use of dogs, that Amundsen was wearing. The furs that Amundsen was wearing would repel water, whereas they were wearing cotton, which was just gathering water and encasing them in frozen sheaths of armor. That all this stuff, that so many things that just led to this horrific thing. But this is a book about masculinity. I think that's one of the things where I think there's a lot of books like this that it's kind of an interesting way of getting at masculinity, of what it is to be a man, or what people think it is to be a man, and what that drives them to. I think of stuff like John Krakauer, Into the Wild, a book about a young fellow going into the wild to be isolated, and there being a part of that book, and the kind of subsequent some people hero worshipping that Chris Candless guy. It's like it's one of these telling things about how men can kind of view what's admirable, what's while other people can go, that's pretty messed up. It's this heroic thing. There's characters in this book that talk about how, oh, I'm so lucky to be at this point, this last little gasp of where we can do something with physical effort versus using mechanisms, technology to do stuff for us. This is where we can truly test ourselves as men. And there's also just this strange thing of all these strange, very kind of uptight, closed off Englishmen who use putting themselves in these death-defying situations or death-bringing situations to actually be able to kind of peel back all that reserve and actually form bonds with other human beings, with other men, in a way that they have not been able to do in their lives otherwise. It's Beryl Bainbridge. It's interesting, like this being told by a female novelist is like she's not. This isn't a sausage fest, surprisingly, even though it's an all male expedition, and it's like, oh, you would never have a woman along because we're men. I don't know, something like that. But she's really makes a point of bringing in all their relationships with the women in their lives, their wives, their mothers. Some of a lot of those relationships are not happy ones. It's interesting that Scott actually does seem to have a supportive, really, kind of interesting, eccentric partner who, really kind of shines in this book as someone who's like, it's too bad she's not along on this expedition because maybe she could slap some sense into poor Scott at times. It's like you've maybe that's maybe a little kind of a side thing there, is like, men completely divorcing themselves from the feminine, either actual females or just like the feminine within themselves, can kind of lead to lead to this kind of disaster. And also just sort of this fetishization of being men, masculine. It's like, how that can be, that there's kind of a greatness. There is sort of a almost above human thing of how they push themselves past the limits, but it's also cutting themselves off in a lot of way from a certain amount of humanity at the same time. It's kind of rich that way. We now have a fairly rich history of women being able to kind of discuss and think about femininity, about women. And in some ways, I think books like these are trying to get at, again, what actually is it to be a man, and what is it to be, what is it to be a healthy man, and what is it to be, extreme cases where you think this is something where it's like some stuff's gone wrong, stuff, where you're not, you've pushed yourselves to these kind of limits. It's like, for what reason? For what reason? So yeah, I mean, this book is really great in that it gives really good voice to each of these people in this book. And I found myself just kind of revising my opinion of the various people in the book, looking at them from different facets, especially Scott himself. Taft and Dr. Wilson are very much kind of like, they in some ways are really admirers of him. They really worship him in a way. But that actually starts shifting, especially when you get into Scott's section, but even afterwards with the other two characters who are a lot more skeptical of Scott and his decisions and the reasons he does stuff and his weaknesses and his flaws. The book, because it's like, it's a thin little book, but it's amazing, like how well Bainbridge is able to compress so much information into it, different interpretations of this. This is a highly debated event, and she's able to kind of, through use of the five different sections, to give you a very kind of complex and full picture of what's going on in the book. And just like these kind of there's fun little allusions. At the end of the Bowers section, he says something about, wow, this is like the worst journey in the world. And I went, wait a minute. I heard Steve Donahue talking about the worst journey in the world. And that is The Worst Journey in the World, a 1922 memoir by Apsley Cherry Garrard, one of the surviving members of this expedition. He went with Dr. Wilson and Bowers in the section that Bowers actually narrates, this journey to Cape Crozier, where they almost did die. Apsley Garrard himself, blind without his glasses. And guess what you can't wear in the Antarctic in these kind of conditions? Glasses. So basically he went functionally blind through glaciers with crevasses and falling into the void again and again, and them having to pull him up. But yeah, just those little things. I think that's a memoir I definitely would like to pick up if I continue. I'm probably going to continue, these little fascinating subjects about, and it's not so much about, hero worship, or about like, wow, what amazing things they do. It's more like, wow, these are extreme situation and what men would put themselves through, and what that says about being a man, which I'm a man, and that sometimes sometimes I'm puzzled by that. I am. And on that note, I will leave off my review of The Brthdy Bys, a very small, thin little book. Really, really well done. Really well done. I would totally recommend that. More videos later.